figured it out. I figured it out. Oh, people. Oh, people. They don't hate religion. Oh, they don't hate Christians. They don't hate you at all. They don't hate your little right-wing, little churches and how you push marriage and sex before marriage and all that kind of stuff. Oh, they don't care about it at all. Oh, all that stuff they do, like when you watch, like the whole, what is it, Life of Water or whatever and stuff like that. And they go after the pastors and everything. And they constantly, still to this day, even though like even Footloose, where they're like, oh, the horrible pastors. And aren't the pastors just so terrible? Aren't that, all just the way that the news and the media and everything have just been going on and on and on after the horrible, horrible Christians. Oh, aren't they so terrible? And then after, like all the stuff that I was revealing to you about the research and stuff that like Ben Shapiro did in that one book, when he did all those interviews with Hollywood about how they don't want conservatives in, and how they absolutely, in all of their things, they didn't want anyone to get married, and how they will not portray sex after marriage. When they portray sex after marriage, oh my gosh, do you remember the beginning of FX? Like that series FX or whatever, or what was it? The one about the cosmetic surgeons. This is the way it always goes. It always, always goes. Even they did it with billionaires. If a couple is married, like the sex is absolutely horrible. Like they've got the married couple and the sex is like humdrum. And the guy who isn't married is like having the Oh my gosh. Like that. I figured it out. I figured it out. Oh my gosh, it's not because they hate religion. They may have used people who hated religion and like were abused when they were growing up with child, but no. Had nothing to do with that. Sorry guys. Hate to burst your bubble, but I figured you out. I figured your game out. Oh, you see, globalist. Like, you globalists. Like, man, sometimes it's so transparent. It's when once you figure your game out or whatever. Oh, like I'm trying. Sorry, I'm in pain. I'm like, get it all. Wait till you hear this. Like, wait till you hear this. Okay, let me break it down for you. Oh, it's so freaking big. Okay, so it's always about the money, isn't it? It's always about the money. Always about the money. I couldn't believe it when like Life Water and stuff, they still had like, they're still portraying the 1950s, and they still had a guy who was like, oh, it's so wrong because the church. Even though like churches, even though churches today have like, they're meeting in bars for Bible studies. When I was growing up, churches used to be the place where Alcoholics Anonymous met because no one there drank. But for 20 years now, churches have been meeting in bars. That's where they meet for their Bible studies, or that's where like people, like you can have like, gay couples go to Bible studies. Like that's been going on for 20 years. Like they, cause it's just been like society's been pushed. So it's like whatever little universe that exists in that happens in a different religion now that has no tolerance for gays. Like, no. That's happening in a different religion. There may be some sects of the religion of Christianity, but in general, the Christian culture, like, oh, no. Like there's an incredible level of tolerance that wasn't there 20 years ago. Oh yeah. So like whatever imagined thing that they're still chasing, there's a reason for it. And oh, they went after it. They went after it hard, and they've been going after it hard for a reason. For a reason. Oh, yes. You want to hear what it is? So let me tell you how I figured it out. So it happened when I was doing the research on Starbucks. So hold on. Okay, so I was doing the research on Starbucks, and I was like, you know what? I was trying to figure out like why they did Starbucks, because I remembered I did the research on Starbucks, and I was like, coffee sales were declining. Like they were declining in the 1980s. In 1987, Starbucks, the actual Starbucks company, only had 6 stores in Seattle. Like they're like, oh, we've been around since 1971. No, you had 6 stores in 87 until a globalist like grabbed your company, made it bigger by 1992, so that in 92, 3 months before Agenda 21, in which you 70 times, the stock grew by 70 times. And of course, why would the SEC look at that? Because the Clintons were in office. Unbelievable. No one points that out, that, the guy that did the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world, the guy, the biggest guy, he grew and was developed and flourished in the time of the Clintons. Like, no one talks about that. No. All right. So anyway, so let's talk about Starbucks. So I was trying to decide about Starbucks, and I was like, why did they do it? And I was like, because the reason why coffee sales were declining is because research had come out that coffee wasn't good for you. It was highly addictive and it wasn't good for your body. And so people were actually not drinking it anymore. And I was like, well, why did they do it? Like, why did they push coffee sales? Like, if we already knew it wasn't good for us, and then they just started pushing it, and then they put a higher price tag on it, which made it more desirable. And I was like thinking through it. I was like, well, it replaced coffee houses. Like, they've switched out the coffee houses. And I was like, well, what were coffee houses for? Like, what did we do there? And I was like, okay, we met with our friends. And that made me think of a conversation that my parents had with my therapist. And because I was in, like I told you, I had a really, really screwed up thing. And it was like this whole thing, they had to go, and that did not go well. And they met with them separately. And the therapist told me, they were like, normally I don't like to cross over things, but they were like, I really feel like you need to know these two things. There are two things she told me about the sessions that crossed over. And I'm so glad, because one of the things gave me this, gave me this key, gave me this. And what she said is that my parents were really upset that I was going out with my friends and going out to coffee houses and stuff. And hanging out and doing TGI Fridays and just hanging out. And I was like, huh? And my therapist was like, that's what kids do nowadays, right? That's what kids do today. Now, over the last 5 years, I figured out wow, that stuff I was like, why would my parents have a problem with that? And I was like, that's right. Back then, none of that stuff existed. And I was like, wow, the globalists have really put all that stuff out there, like TGI Fridays and all these little things for us to spend on, like TGI Fridays, Sephora, a million little bars and everything like that. Well, I finally put it together when I thought of Starbucks. Do you know why my parents, it's not just that they put a bunch of those things out there. Do you know why we go out? Do you know why we go out and do all that stuff? Because we are not getting together and having families. When you get together and have families, what do? When you meet somebody, what do you do? What's the term? You settle down. You start investing in your future. Who loses money when you do that? You start saving. You start saving for retirement. You start saving for a house. You start investing in yourself. You start discussing with one another. You start deciding about your future. You start becoming more mature. You start making long-term investment skills. When you are single, you go out, you spend money, you get drinks, you spend a ton. Go ahead and tell me, ladies, on Sex and the City, did those women spend more or less on their looks after they got married on that show? Did their upkeep? When you got married, how much did your expenditures change after you got married? It is not about religion. It never, ever has been. That would be my cats. Tiberius! Out of the kitchen! Never about religion. In the 60s, before the 60s, think about everyone, your grandparents and everything before that, how wealthy they are. Do you know why they are that wealthy? Do you know why? That is everyone who's doing cruises around the world. Like when my husband and I finally took a cruise, we've only been on 2 cruises, but when we went on a cruise, we went on 1 cruise, and because cruises are really cheap nowadays, and we didn't do anything like that, we didn't do any expenditures or anything like that, and we were like, this cruise is cheaper than any vacation we've been on, right? So we went on a cruise, which I highly recommend it. I highly recommend doing an Alaska cruise. Don't do any of the extras at all. Just do the Alaska cruise. Just do a little indoor cabin, and just do the Alaska cruise. And don't do any of the shops or anything like that, but go out, and the people that you meet is everything. You meet people from around the world who you can talk with, and you get around that table. And it's impossible to go around that ship without stopping and having a 3-hour conversation with everybody. It's absolutely phenomenal. And now the left is trying to turn the cruises, and I understand why. Like, they're trying to infect every single bit of programming, and I get it. Because that's where all the conversation's happening. That's where all the minds are still growing. That's where all the real, but the thing is you go on there and you meet people. Like, I remember the first time we got on there, and the guy was like, this is my 64th cruise, and I can't believe it. And we were like, 64th? Do you know why they have that wealth? It's not because they're in the 1%. They're not. It's because they never went bar hopping. You listen to the old Susie Orman shows, because I know they've changed, but you listen to the old ones, and she's like, if you just took that $1,000 that you just spent this year and you put it into a savings account, that becomes like $1 million 20 years on down the line. The globalists don't want us doing that. And those older generations, that's what they did. They got married younger. They met the moment they were like 18, the moment they were 16, 17, 18, they were thinking, who do I meet? Like, they were looking for someone because they didn't think it was evil to meet someone. They didn't think that that was a bad thing. They didn't think that that was evil, some evil perpetration to do. And it's not like what they say. It wasn't arranged marriages. Like, I've read tons and tons of books, and they like all have amazing love stories. Like, they fell in love. And I've met a ton of those dancers, and they are still in love to this day. That's why when one passes on, the other one passes on at the same time. Because they made sure to meet and marry someone that they loved. But they were looking for that early on. And now, everything in our culture, everything in the media, in the news, from the moment we're really young, it's like, don't. Like, that's a bad thing. We're supposed to be doing things very, very differently. And then that's a horrible religious strict thing that's being put on us. And I think it's hysterical because that's the first thing people thought when I was like, oh, getting married. They were like, that's religious. And I was like, are you joking? Like, that's not a Christian thing, getting married. Marriages are all around the world. There are civil marriages. I do believe the gay rights movement just fought and won a constitutional battle to get married. They didn't want just a civil union. They wanted the right to marry, and they won it. So why are you still saying that marriage is a Christian thing only? And why is all the media still yelling at us that you have to do all these other things instead of getting married? And why will they not portray sex or love or any of these intimate things after marriage when it all exists? It all exists. It is phenomenal. And you look at Agenda 21 and you realize they don't want us together. They don't want us because you know what happens? If we amass any kind of wealth and we die, where does the money go? It doesn't go on to our kids because we don't have any. I am serious. Like, just look at the Sex and the City, and they really sold it to us as freedom. And now I look at it as like, how much money? How much money were they just telling? Like, how much money do we spend on trying to look good and constantly being single? Just, I really want you to think about it. How hard do they sell the single life versus selling the married life. The married life is where you get the tax cuts. It's where you get the tax breaks. And all the scientific studies show that that's where you're happier. But all they ever do is push how miserable you are when you're married. You know why? Because they push how great the single life is. So they always think the grass is greener. The grass is greener. The grass is greener. There is nothing out there telling you how to be married. There's zero telling you how to be married. Why do you think that is? The rich get richer when people don't get married. Think about that. And if you yell at me, well, that just must be a Christian viewpoint, then you tell me why the gay rights movement won and fought and everything. You tell me why there are civil unions. You tell me why it's still marriage in Islam. You tell me that there's still marriage in the Jewish faith. And you tell me why there is still marriage all around the world in every single country around the world that isn't of Christian faith. It is not a unique thing to Christians. That is something they are selling you. And you're buying it. And I don't blame you. But it is nothing but a sales tactic. And yes, they absolutely got Hollywood to do it. And I believe they got to Hollywood to do it because, yeah, some people in Hollywood did feel caught up. They did buy into it. They did think, oh, I was restricted. But we know now that was a sales tactic too. They were like, oh yeah, religion restricted me. Oh yeah, religion restricted me. Well, we also know that's the generation that just got hardcore hooked on drugs and died and had depression and everything like that. They're dying young. And what happened to the generation that didn't do that? Oh gee, they're the ones living twice as long. They're the ones whose relationships didn't break up, bust up, die up, everything. They're the ones that aren't being found in hotel rooms alone. They're the ones that don't have stories popping up in Bloomberg and Forbes mysteriously at the age of 54. Because now that we have a new government, now we have people that are actually credible witnesses. If you're like, why are we suddenly getting stories? It's because, gee, like things are being prosecuted now. There can't be witnesses. God, I'm going to get killed for saying that. I better go. Oh God. Okay, I better go now. But just think about that. All right? It is just a money game. Just look at my research. Look at that paper chart on that global thing. Let me put it this way. The money didn't look like that. The global financial system didn't look like that until they started attacking marriage in the mainstream media. It wasn't until movies demonized marriage and totally glorified prostitution, underage sex, and the single life. Isn't it interesting? Then that's when the money transfer happened. That's when we suddenly had nothing to do. Because we didn't have families anymore. Suddenly we were single. And what did we have to do? We had to hang out and shop, and we needed places to go. And so we spent our money. We just went out, TGI Fridays, bar hopping, spending $20 on a drink. Who gets that money? Have to have a new thing for every night. We're not putting into homes because you don't buy a home until you find somebody. Now they've got us online to the point where the young men don't even leave their rooms and they can't speak to a woman. We're going to fix that. Because this wasn't our choice. This was not our choice. We want the facts. We want the power back. We want our money back. We're rising up. We want to talk to each other again. We want to meet each other again. We want to find out where the joy is. And we're learning that it's not what they've been telling us it is. It's not on Facebook. It's not on Twitter. It's somewhere else out there. And we're going to find it together. But they aren't the answer. They used Hollywood. I know a lot of Hollywood directors and producers are watching this. And you know what they're doing right now? They're remembering the big money who talked to them when they were young and told them about how awful it was that they had a religious upbringing, and who told them it was so horrible, and who told them that it was their right to rebel, and how evil it was, and how good the world would be without it. And they're wondering how much harm they did on behalf of an older, larger demon.